On December 31st, 2025, something strange happened in Silicon Valley. Not a product launch, not a company acquisition, not a technological breakthrough. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows when someone very important leaves a room, when the energy shifts, when the air feels different. On that single day, two of America's most powerful tech billionaires made quiet announcements. Peter Thiel, David Sachs. Both declared they had established significant presences outside California, one in Miami, one in Texas. Within hours, financial advisors across the Bay Area began receiving phone calls. Urgent ones, panicked ones, billionaires asking the same question. How fast can I get out? By January 1st, 2026, at least 6 billionaires had officially ended their California residency. By the end of the first week, that number had grown. 12, 15, possibly more. And they weren't just leaving. They were running. From what? A single piece of paper. A ballot initiative that hasn't even been voted on yet. A proposal that might never become law. The California Billionaire Tax Act. A one-time 5% tax on anyone worth more than $1 billion. 5%. That's it. A number that sounds almost reasonable. Almost fair. But here's what that number actually means. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, worth an estimated $192 billion. Would owe California $9.6 billion. Larry Page, co-founder of Google, worth approximately $144 billion. Would owe $7.2 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jensen Huang. Billions upon billions. Hoop upon billions upon billions. In total, California's roughly 200 billionaires hold an estimated $2 trillion in combined wealth. 5% of $2 trillion is $100 billion. $100 billion. For a state drowning in debt, for a government struggling to fund schools, hospitals, and homeless services. It sounds like salvation. But there's a problem. The billionaires heard about this tax in December. The residency cutoff date was January 1st. And California's tax laws are notoriously aggressive. If you are a California resident on January 1st, 2026, you owe the tax. Period. It doesn't matter if you move to Texas tomorrow. It doesn't matter if you renounce your citizenship. It doesn't matter if you die. Your estate will pay. So what did the billionaires do? They ran. And according to one prominent venture capitalist tracking the exodus, they took something with them. $1 trillion. Half of everything. Gone. To understand what's happening in California right now, you need to understand how billionaires think about residency. It's not like you or me moving apartments. It's not boxers and trucks and forwarding addresses. It's architecture, legal architecture, financial architecture, the kind that takes months, sometimes years, to construct, and the kind that can be dismantled in days if you have the right advisors. David Lesperance is one of those advisors. He specializes in something called tax migration, helping ultra-wealthy individuals relocate from high-tax jurisdictions to low-tax ones. In a normal year, Lesperance might help a handful of clients leave California. 2 or 3, maybe 4. In December 2025 alone, he personally helped 4 billionaires end their California residency. 4. In 1 month, from one advisor. There are dozens of advisors like him. The process itself is surgical. First, you establish a physical presence in another state, a home, an office, something tangible. Then you begin shifting your business entities, LLCs, family offices, investment vehicles. Public filings reviewed by journalists showed exactly this pattern. Larry Page, the Google co-founder who rarely speaks publicly and guards his privacy obsessively, began moving his entities out of California in December. His family office, Coop LLC, was converted from a California entity to a Delaware one on December 23rd. His influenza research fund, Flu Lab LLC, followed shortly after. A flying car venture called One Arrow now lists its primary address in Florida. Page himself has reportedly left the state entirely. An anonymous source told business reporters he's gone. Just gone. Oracle founder Larry Ellison took a different approach. He sold his San Francisco home, a $45 million property, the largest real estate transaction in the city for 2025. Why sell a house you've owned for years? Why do it in December? Why do it so quickly that you accept an off-market deal rather than listing publicly? Because the clock was ticking, because January 1st was coming, because 5% of $192 billion is a number no one wants to pay. Peter Thiel, the PayPal co-founder and controversial tech investor, announced on New Year's Eve that he had maintained a personal residence in Miami since 2020 and operated a founder's fund office there since 2021. The timing of that announcement was not coincidental. Thiel was establishing a paper trail, a legal defense, evidence that his primary residence was never really California at all. Will it work? That depends on the lawyers, on the judges, on the specific details of his travel history, his voting records, his tax filings. California's Franchise Tax Board is notoriously aggressive in pursuing departed residents. They've been known to audit people for years after they leave, looking for any evidence that their move wasn't genuine. A few nights in a California hotel, a single piece of mail sent to an old address, a flight that lands at LAX instead of connecting through Phoenix. Any of these could be enough to establish residency, to trigger the tax. The billionaires know this. That's why they're not just leaving. They're erasing themselves. Here's the detail that makes this tax different from any other. Most taxes work prospectively. You pass a law, the law takes effect. From that moment forward, people pay. The California billionaire tax doesn't work that way. If voters approve the measure in November 2026, the tax will apply retroactively to anyone who is a California resident on January 1st, 2026. Read that again. The vote happens in November, but the residency cutoff was 11 months earlier. This is, according to tax attorneys, legally aggressive and constitutionally unprecedented. It's also, according to the bill's supporters, entirely intentional. The union that proposed the tax, SEI United Healthcare Workers West, knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that if they set the cutoff date after the vote, every billionaire in California would have months to relocate. So they set the trap early. They set it before anyone even knew the trap existed. The proposal was filed in late 2025. It became public in December. The cutoff date had already passed by the time most billionaires understood what was happening. Some of them made it out. The ones with fast lawyers and flexible lives. The ones who could afford to abandon California homes, California businesses, California tithe. Overnight, but others didn't make it. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA and one of the wealthiest people in the world, worth approximately $157 billion, has said publicly that he's staying. "We chose to live in Silicon Valley," Huang told reporters this week, "and whatever taxes they would like to apply, so be it. I'm perfectly fine with it. Perfectly fine with a $7.85 billion tax bill." Is he genuinely Does he believe the measure will fail at the ballot box? Does he have legal strategies we don't know about? Or is he simply trapped? Because here's the thing about California residency law. It's not a simple binary. You're not either a resident or not a resident. It's a standard that looks at subjective and objective factors. Where do you sleep most nights? Where's your family? Where do you vote? Where are your doctors, your dentists, your accountants? Where do you feel at home? These questions don't have clean answers. And for someone like Jensen Huang, who has built his entire career in Santa Clara, whose company is headquartered in Silicon Valley, whose life is woven into the fabric of the Bay Area, leaving isn't simple. Leaving might not even be possible. Not in the legal sense. Not in a way that would survive an audit. So he stays. He absorbs a cost that would bankrupt most countries, and he watches his peers flee. The billionaires who left California before January 1st will pay nothing. The billionaires who stayed will pay everything. Two people. Same wealth, same success, same contribution to the economy. Different outcomes based entirely on timing, on luck, on how fast they could mobilize lawyers in December. Is that fair? Is that even legal? The courts will decide. Eventually, after years of litigation. After billions in legal fees, but by then, the damage will be done. But he's also someone who tracks capital flows obsessively. And now half of those people are leaving. California's 13.3% tax rate on those returns would yield $6.65 billion per year. Over 10 years, that's $66.5 billion. Over 20 years, $133 billion. The billionaire tax promises $100 billion once. The billionaire exodus could cost $100 billion or more in lost revenue. Permanently. Forever. Plus the property taxes on the homes they're selling. Plus the sales taxes on the goods they're no longer buying. Plus the jobs at the companies they're relocating. Chamath Palihapitiya put it bluntly. California billionaires were reliable taxpayers. They were the sheep you could shear forever. Now California will lose this revenue source forever. He's biased. He's self-interested. He might be exaggerating, but even if he's half right, California's made a catastrophic miscalculation. They tried to take everything. They might end up with nothing. Not everyone is running. Jensen Huang's public acceptance of the tax made headlines. But he's not alone. Some billionaires genuinely believe in California, in its universities, its talent pool, its ecosystem. They built their fortunes here. Their identities are tied to this place. Others are trapped by circumstance. Their companies are here. Their families are here. Leaving would mean abandoning everything they've built. And some are simply calling the bluff. They believe the Billionaire Tax Act will never pass. That California voters, faced with the economic consequences, will reject it at the ballot box. The measure needs to qualify first. It needs signatures. It needs to survive legal challenges. Then it needs a majority vote in November. That's a lot of obstacles. Governor Gavin Newsom has publicly opposed the tax. ASA called it economically damaging and warned about capital flight. Business groups are mobilizing against it. They're running ads. They're funding opposition research. They're warning voters about the consequences. And the departures themselves might shift public opinion. When voters see Larry Page leaving, when they read about Peter Thiel's Miami announcement, when they hear Chamath Palihapitiya's trillion-dollar estimate, DOT, good riddance? Or what have we done? That's the question that will determine California's future. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that neither side wants to acknowledge. Both perspectives are valid. The billionaires are leaving because they don't want to pay. That's a fact. They have the means to avoid the tax, and they're using those means. But the billionaires also didn't create the rules. They didn't write the tax code that allowed them to accumulate $2 trillion in California while paying relatively little to the state. They just operated within the system, and the system was broken. California's reliance on billionaire wealth was always unstable, always dangerous. A budget that swings wildly based on stock market performance. A tax base concentrated in a few hundred families. An economy built on the assumption that wealthy people would stay forever. That assumption was naive. Wealthy people have always moved. From state to state, from country to country. Whatever the tax burden is lowest, wherever the regulations are lightest, California offered something special for decades. An ecosystem. A network. A mythology of innovation. Was that enough to keep them? For a while. Maybe. But 5% of their total wealth is not a small ask. It's not a marginal rate increase. It's not a modest contribution. It's $9.6 billion from Larry Ellison, $7.2 billion from Larry Page, $7.85 billion from Jensen Huang. Numbers that could fund entire state agencies. Numbers that could eliminate homelessness in Los Angeles. Numbers that could transform California's schools. Or numbers that could drive every billionaire to Florida. The supporters of the tax believed the billionaires were bluffing, that they loved California too much to leave, that the ecosystem was irreplaceable. Some of them were right. Jensen Huang stayed. But others were wrong. Larry Page is gone. Peter Thiel is gone. David Sachs is gone. Larry Ellison is selling his homes. The billionaires weren't bluffing, and California doesn't have a backup plan. Here's the question that keeps California lawmakers awake at night. If the billionaires leave, who pays? The immediate answer is nobody. The state loses revenue. The budget shrinks. Programs get cut. But that's not sustainable. Not for a state of 39 million people. Not for an economy the size of France. Eventually, someone has to pay. And the only someone left is the middle class. California already has the highest income tax rate in America. The highest sales tax, some of the highest property taxes in high-value areas. The average Californian pays more in taxes than the average resident of almost any other state. And they're leaving too. U-Haul data shows that California has had the largest net outflow of residents for 6 consecutive years. More people leaving than arriving, year after year after year. They're going to Texas, to Arizona, to Nevada, to Tennessee. Places with no income tax, lower cost of living, cheaper housing. The same places the billionaires are going. The difference is, middle-class families can't relocate their businesses to Delaware overnight. They can't maintain dual residencies in Miami. They can't afford teams of tax attorneys to optimize their departures. They just leave. Quietly. One family at a time, and every family that leaves reduces California's tax base further. Every departure makes the remaining residents more responsible for funding state services. Every move increases the burden on those who stay. It's a spiral, a feedback loop, a slow motion collapse. The billionaire exodus isn't happening in isolation. It's the most visible symptom of a broader disease. California is becoming unaffordable. For everyone, the people who can afford to leave are leaving. The people who can't afford to leave are trapped. And the state keeps raising taxes on the people who remain. The Billionaire Tax Act promises to fund health care, education, and food assistance. Noble goals. Essential services. But if the tax drives away the billionaires, and the resulting budget shortfall leads to cuts, and those cuts fall hardest on the poor and middle class, who actually benefits? The union that proposed the tax believes the billionaires are bluffing, that they'll pay rather than leave. that $100 billion in new revenue will transform California. Maybe they're right, but if they're wrong, if the billionaires are gone, if the $1 trillion is unrecoverable, if the middle class faces higher taxes to fill the gap, then the Billionaire Tax Act won't be remembered as progressive policy. It will be remembered as the moment California broke itself. There's something deeply ironic about what's happening in California right now. The state that built the modern tech economy. The state that gave us Apple and Google and Facebook and Tesla. The state that transformed human communication, transportation, and commerce. That state is now watching its most successful creations leave. Elon Musk left in 2020. He moved Tesla's headquarters to Texas. He moved SpaceX's operations to Texas. He moved himself to Texas. His departure cost California an estimated $18 billion in capital gains taxes alone. That was the warning shot. The billionaire exodus of 2026 is the full bombardment. And here's the paradox. The very innovations that made California rich are now making it easy for the rich to leave. Technology enables remote work. Digital infrastructure allows companies to operate from anywhere. The same tools that Silicon Valley invented are now untethering Silicon Valley from California. Jensen Huang can run NVIDIA from Santa Clara, or from Austin, or from Singapore. The chips don't care where the CEO sleeps. Peter Thiel's venture capital fund can evaluate startups from Miami just as easily as from San Francisco. The Zoom calls work the same. Larry Page doesn't need to be physically present in California to manage his investments. AS phones, AS planes, he has an army of subordinates. The ecosystem that once held Silicon Valley together. The coffee shops, the networking events, the chance encounters between founders and funders still exists. But it's becoming optional. You can build a tech company in Miami now, in Austin, in Dubai. The talent is distributed. The capital is mobile. The infrastructure is global. California's competitive advantage was never just about tax rates or regulations. It was about concentration, about density, about being in the room where it happened. But the room is virtual now, and virtual rooms don't pay California state taxes. The supporters of the Billionaire Tax Act argue that the wealthy owe something to the society that made their wealth possible. California's universities trained their engineers. California's roads carried their products. California's legal system protected their patents. That's true, but it's also true that billionaires can now access those same resources from anywhere. They can hire UC Berkeley graduates remotely. They can ship products through California ports. Without living in California, they can use the American legal system while maintaining residency in Florida. The relationship has become California needs billionaires more than billionaires need California. That wasn't always true. It might not be true forever, but it's true right now. And right now is when the Billionaire Tax Act is forcing everyone to choose. Everything we've discussed assumes the Billionaire Tax Act survives legal challenge. That's not certain. In fact, it's not even likely. Tax attorneys across the country have raised serious constitutional objections to the proposal. First, the retroactive nature of the tax. Setting a January 1, 2026 residency cutoff for a vote happening in November 2026 is, according to many legal scholars, constitutionally problematic. The Supreme Court has generally allowed retroactive taxation, but within limits. Tax must be modest and must relate to a legitimate legislative purpose. Is 5% of total wealth modest? Is $9.6 billion from a single individual modest? The courts will have to decide. Second, the definition of wealth itself. The tax applies to worldwide net worth, including assets held overseas, including ownership stakes in private companies, including investments that are difficult or impossible to value accurately. How do you assess the net worth of someone like Elon Musk, whose wealth fluctuates by billions of dollars daily based on Tesla's stock price? Do you tax him on his peak wealth, his average wealth, his wealth on a specific day? What about founders of private companies whose valuations are entirely theoretical? A startup might be worth $10 billion based on its last funding round, but that doesn't mean the founder can access that money. It's paper wealth, illiquid, uncertain, Taxing paper wealth forces people to sell assets to pay the tax, which might crash the value of those assets, which might mean they can't pay the full amount. Third, the question of equal protection. California has roughly 200 billionaires. 200 people subject to a tax that applies to no one else. Is that a class of one situation? Can a state single out a tiny group of individuals for special taxation? The precedent is unclear. Fourth, the exit tax dimension. By setting a retroactive residency date, California is essentially taxing people for leaving. That raises serious constitutional concerns about the right to travel, the right to relocate, the right to change domicile. The courts have repeatedly struck down exit taxes at the state level. California's version is cleverly disguised. It's not technically an exit tax. It's a wealth tax with a retroactive trigger date, but the effect is the same. Leave before January 1st. No tax. Leave after January 1st. Full tax. That looks a lot like penalizing departure. All of these challenges will take years to resolve. The Billionaire Tax Act, even if passed by voters, will face immediate litigation, injunctions, appeals, Supreme Court review. By the time the legal dust settles, the billionaires will be long gone. They're not waiting for the courts. They're not betting on constitutional challenges. They're just leaving. And constitutional victory in 2029 won't bring them back. We started this story with a silence. The silence of billionaires leaving Silicon Valley. The silence of mansions being sold. The silence of family offices relocating to Delaware. Let's end with a different kind of silence. The silence of a question that no one in California can answer. What happens next? The optimistic scenario. The Billionaire Tax Act fails at the ballot box. Voters see the departures, understand the consequences, reject the measure. The billionaires who left don't return. That wealth is gone forever. But the exodus stops. California stabilizes. The lesson is learned. The pessimistic scenario. The tax passes. The remaining billionaires either pay or fight in court for years. Meanwhile, more wealth leaves. Middle-class taxes rise to fill the gap. The exodus accelerates. California enters a structural decline that takes decades to reverse. The catastrophic scenario. The tax passes. The legal challenges fail, and other states adopt similar measures. A race to the bottom. Billionaires fleeing from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. National capital flight to places like Puerto Rico, Portugal, Dubai. The unlikely scenario. The tax passes, and nothing bad happens. The billionaires pay. The money funds transformative programs. California becomes a model for progressive taxation. Other states follow. Which scenario is most likely? Nobody knows. That's not a rhetorical device. That's the truth. We are in genuinely uncharted territory. No American state has ever attempted a wealth tax of this magnitude. No jurisdiction has ever tried to tax unrealized capital gains at 5%. No democracy has ever told its richest citizens, pay us billions, retroactively, or else. California is running an experiment. The hypotheses. Billionaires will stay because California is irreplaceable. The data so far, at least a dozen have already left. The conclusion. Pending. Meanwhile, the state with the world's 5th largest economy. The state that produces a quarter of America's agricultural output. The state that houses Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere. That state is bleeding wealth. $1 trillion, according to one estimate. Possibly more. Possibly much more. And no one in Sacramento seems to have a plan. Governor Newsom opposes the tax, but hasn't proposed an alternative. Legislators debate the merits but don't address the exodus. The unions push forward with signature collection, while billionaires pack their bags. Everyone is talking. No one is acting. And the silence grows. The silence of empty mansions in Atherton. The silence of for sale signs in Pacific Heights. The silence of private jets departing San Francisco for the last time. California built a dream of innovation, of opportunity, of reinvention. For decades, That dream attracted the world's most ambitious people. They came with nothing. They built empires. They changed humanity. And now they're leaving. Not because they hate California, not because they want to punish the state that made them rich, but because someone asked them to share, and they said no. Is that greed? Is that rational self-in? Is that the inevitable result of a system that treats wealth as a personal achievement rather than a social trust? The question is philosophical. The consequences are economic. In California, the Golden State, the land of dreams, the place where the future was supposed to be invented, California is about to find out what happens when the dreamers stop dreaming here. The silence is the answer. Listen closely. Can you hear it? $1 trillion. That's not a statistic. That's not an abstraction. That's the combined wealth of nations. That's generations of innovation. That's the value created by millions of workers, millions of ideas, millions of hours of human effort. Gone, not destroyed, just relocated to Texas, to Florida, to Delaware, to anywhere that isn't California. The billionaires aren't evil. They're not heroes either. They're just people. People who did the math. People who decided that 5% of everything they own was too much to pay. Was that the wrong decision? It depends on who you ask. Ask the union members who proposed the tax, and they'll tell you the billionaires betrayed the state that made them rich. Ask the billionaires, and they'll tell you they have a right to keep what they earned. Ask the middle-class families watching from the sidelines, and they'll tell you they're tired of being caught in the crossfire. Everyone is right. Everyone is wrong. That's the nature of this moment. California took a gamble. They bet that billionaires love the state more than they loved their money. Some of them did. Most of them didn't. And now California has to live with the result. $1 trillion poor, 100 billionaires lighter. A future that looks very different from the one they imagined. The Golden State, tarnished, but not dead. Not yet. The question isn't whether California will survive this moment. Of course, it will. 39 million people don't disappear because a few hundred billionaires left. The question is what California becomes of a warning to other states about overreach, a model for progressive taxation, a cautionary tale about depending on the ultra-wealthy. We don't know yet. We won't know for years, but we do know this. Something broke in California on January 1st, 2026, something that might never be fixed. The silence you hear, that's the sound of money leaving. That's the sound of a dream ending. That's the sound of California waking up.